This is the Powered Up Podcast, show number 5.
Of course, like being passionate about the content, having a growth mindset. I was really into Joe Bowler and reading her mathematical mindset book about how to approach learning in that way. And that's something that I still work on even now. Like I try to teach my kids a little bit about growth mindset and the power of yet and just things like that to make them excited, but also to make them realize that, we're continuously learning.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Herman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt Won't You Be My Mentor Rogers. Matt, what's going on?
Oh, what an introduction. Things are good in the neighborhood. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. We had a professional development today where it was more of just a roundtable discussion where teachers could bring things that are going well, things that aren't going well, just organic conversation. And I was able to connect with a lot of teachers that I haven't worked with too much this year in my new role. So that was exciting. So a question I want to throw at you, which is going to lead into our phenomenal interview that we just finished up, is what is one thing that you remember from year one of teaching?
Oh man. Looking back on year one, I would describe it as embarrassing. I think I remember the idea of feeling like we had to set an expectation at the beginning of the year, and I had no clue what those expectations and routines and kind of classroom rules and what made my classroom unique, like the classroom culture and the kind of mantra of our class. I remember looking back and trying to force some things to work, while also learning about the population that I was working in, not realizing that was important to tailor a lot to who I was teaching compared to my own teaching and learning experience. Where I grew up is definitely different than where I teach, and some of the values and last names are different than I've ever heard before. So that's where I would say is that difficult. Hey, you kind of need to have answers even if you've never heard the question before type mindset. What about you? If you were to go back to year one, how would you best summarize, or something that sticks out to you from your first year?
So I'm going to go back to my first position, which in year one for me was mostly subbing and teaching second grade for 4 months. And what I realized was, I was absolutely in the career I wanted to be in. B, I realized that I was pretty good at it. I thought I was doing overall a good job. And C, the third thing was I needed to ask for help. I needed to find people to help me. I had a reading coach come into my class very early on. It was what I was least comfortable teaching. And she observed me. She taught with me. She modeled for me. We had a few coaching sessions, and it really helped me just become more confident, and also helped me realize what I wanted to focus on when planning my reading lessons. And so that was a very valuable experience for me. And also, within probably 2 or 3 weeks of starting, I had to write up report card comments because of just when I took over. It was very close to the end of the marking period. And I didn't take the time to really think about how important those comments were, what the message was going to be sent. I didn't ask a single person for any advice. I had never written report card comments before. I don't think I did it in student teaching. I don't know why. And I didn't ask anybody for advice, whether a colleague, my principal. And luckily, my principal looked over my shoulder and I'll never forget, I was leaving a tutoring session at probably 5 o'clock at night. And my principal calls me and says, report cards are going out tomorrow. I need you to come in and fix your comments. So I'm panicking driving to school thinking like I just blew my career because my principal probably thinks I'm an idiot. And they weren't terrible. They were just specific things that he wanted me to fix. Most of it was just the approach of starting positive, offering some sort of, coachable criticism, and then ending with positive, and making sure you do that at minimum on every one. And it made me realize that in important moments, in a sense like that, you're putting a comment about a child in ink to send home to a parent. It's a very important moment, and you need to make sure you're doing it well. And so I took from that experience of I need to ask for more help. And so the next year, when I was in my own position, at first marking period, I scheduled a meeting with my principal and said, hey, do you mind just looking over my report card comments before they go home? And I didn't really get much advice, which was fine. But it wasn't just about the report card comments. It was that in general. What were those moments that I needed to make sure that I was seeking advice from trusted colleagues or my direct supervisor? And our interview tonight, she does a great job talking about this. So we had an interview with Susan Jehimiak. I'm almost positive I got that right. I asked her a couple times before. So she is in her third year of teaching. She's from Illinois, and she just brought a great message. It was a great conversation. Matt and I were kind of talking afterwards before we started this intro recording that it was very uplifting. It was very just I'll let you go into it, Matt. What were your initial thoughts right after?
Well, I think that it allowed me to remember the questions and feelings and concern and excitement, all the emotions that you eventually kind of just train yourself to endure. I loved she talked about the ebbs and flows of a school year and how you have to weather them and realize that that's normal. I think it just there were some really, really cool comments and perspective that we all can connect to, and even Ken, to go to your opening and your first year. I think one of the greatest things that you hear through this is the being vulnerable is a great thing. In pre-service experience, you're really competing against your other really hardworking classmates. But when you move into a full-time position, it's not about being faultless. It's being the best for kids. And so I know a lot of younger teachers struggle to ask questions and struggle to recognize that they don't have the answers because they aren't supposed to show fault through college experience. So to have that and to hear how she's been getting great feedback well before I was receiving and willing to receive feedback early in my teaching career, I think that was one of the things that stuck out most to me.
Definitely. I think this is a really important message for pre-service and newer teachers to hear. I think, Susan will be a great mentor in leading you in that. And for our veteran teachers that have been at it for 10, 20, 30 years, I absolutely think this will be a recentering episode for you, one that will leave you feeling powered up. So without any further delay, let's get into the interview with Susan Jehimiak. Hey, Susan, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
We're doing very well. So we're super excited to have you here. So just to let our audience get to know you a little bit more, why don't you tell us where you're from, just a small snapshot of your teaching experience and where you are in your career.
Hi, my name is Susan Jehimiak. I'm currently a third-year teacher. I am teaching sixth grade near Orland Park. I'm from Orland Park, but I currently teach in Joliet. I love what I do, and it's definitely been an adjustment this year being remote. So far, we've been remote all year, and last week they announced that we would be remote for the rest, so that's been difficult, not seeing the students face to face. So that has been an adjustment, but I love being able to integrate technology and interact with my students in a whole different way.
So year three. So you survived year one. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
then your second year, where you're starting to figure things out, that's when, I'm guessing it was right around March, things were abruptly shut down due to COVID. And now you've been in a whole new world for the, I guess, the second half of your career. So what's been one of your biggest learning experiences with the shift that you've had to make?
I would say that the biggest learning experience has been adjusting to just, the whole COVID and everything with the kids. I think our kids, come to class, they're excited to learn, especially in August. They were eager, and now I'm kind of seeing that slowly shut down a little bit just because of, they announced that we'd be remote, and some kids just kind of lost that motivation to keep going and to, earn their grade. And that has been the biggest struggle, but I'm trying to build those relationships and connect with them outside of Zoom and doing office hours and things like that just to interact with them more. And that's been helping because they do want to learn, but it really is, that issue of work completion and getting things logistically handled on our end as teachers. It's been an adjustment, but the kids have been working really hard. So it really is just finding kind of what's working for the students.
Yeah, I think universally, those are very similar situations that everyone's kind of navigating right now. So only going into year three, and I know Ken kind of talked about year two, you're expected to have all the answers already. You get 1 year of crash course, and after that, you're up and running. And last year to be kind of again, unique experience as well as year three. Touching into, since it's been relatively recently, your pre-service kind of training before you really got into the classroom with your name badge outside the door. I would imagine that no training got you prepared quite for what we're going through. But there's obviously some things that you learned that you're still tapping into. Can you talk about that pre-service experience to drive you to find success so early on in your teaching career?
Yeah, of course. So I attended ISU, so Illinois State University, and I had a great experience with the middle level program because we were able to get into the classroom during my sophomore year, junior year, and then senior. So I had an internship for a semester during my junior year in a math classroom, fell in love with math, knew that I wanted to teach middle school math. Then I went into my senior year and I actually did a full year student teaching program. So they have a program called PDS. So I was in the classroom from August to May with the same group of students. So that was really cool because it felt like my first year, but I was obviously under the watch of a cooperating teacher who really led the way and helped me figure out what's working and what isn't. And then, I had an amazing experience. I got to interact with the students in a different way, and it was just really cool. And I felt like that really helped me solidify my passion for teaching, but also it helped me figure out what I wanted, like what kind of teacher I wanted to be in the future and give me some techniques, to try out. And I learned that a lot of it is definitely about flexibility. Like some days things go great, and then other days we have to switch the lesson for the next class period because it didn't go the way we wanted it to. So that was helpful, and that flexibility has definitely proven to be important, especially, the past year. So that was definitely a great lesson that I'm thankful for because we keep using it as teachers. You have to be flexible on the spot, within the class period, within a day, things change. So it's been definitely something I'm still working on, but it got easier with that experience.
Well, and I think what's interesting there is, so Ken and I are based out of Pennsylvania, and we like to consider the state of Pennsylvania, the schools that we went to be teacher specialty schools. But I've never heard of a full year student teaching experience in that same role. From my end, I had a mentor the first year, but for the most part, they were a teacher that was also doing their own classroom. I've got to imagine having direct access to one teacher that you kind of, I guess, lean into all year long and split responsibilities. I assume in much like a co-teaching environment as well as direct student teaching. What a unique way to muddle through that, what we would traditionally consider just standard student teaching, where you teach a few lessons and you have some experience. It seems like you had a more immersive, realistic view of what the classroom is before you went searching for your first position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we always I was worried about doing PDS because I was taking classes at the same time, and I was like, "How is that gonna work with, 19 credit hours and teaching?" And figuring all that out was a lot, but it was definitely beneficial because we learned how the beginning of the school year looked like, and then I got to see the end of the year of the same kids, so that whole routines and, structure and how that looks like even before I officially started was really helpful because I got a sense of how things adapt and that natural, like, you're really excited at the beginning of the year and then you get less excited as January hits and February, and then it kind of goes back up. So that natural progression made me realize just that's natural. You're gonna have those moments where you're tired or you're discouraged, but then you kind of you build those relationships with your kids and they make you want to keep going because they get you excited about teaching and learning.
Definitely weathering the storm.
Agreed. And I like how you hit on the fact of seeing the beginning of the year, because there's so many important parts that beginning of the year that unfortunately, in a traditional sense, a lot of student teachers miss out on if they're doing it at the end of their senior year. You said that during your student teaching experience, I think you said you realized the teacher that you wanted to become. Can you dive into that a little bit more as to what you meant about that, and kind of what that looks like now?
Yeah, so when I was in student teaching, I actually started my Twitter account during my pre-service years. So that was a big help with reflecting and being able to connect with other educators. So I started to really mold the desire of like, okay, I want to teach how, what characteristics do I want to emulate in my classroom that I can carry with me? So, of course, like being passionate about the content, having a growth mindset. I was really into Joe Bowler and reading her mathematical mindset book about how to approach learning in that way. And that's something that I still work on even now. Like I try to teach my kids a little bit about growth mindset and the power of yet and just things like that to make them excited, but also to make them realize that, we're continuously learning as they're learning as students, I'm learning as a teacher, and it's never a final product. You have to keep going. So that, skill of being a lifelong learner and just things that like work ethic and, persistence and not being afraid to ask questions or ask for advice, things like that that I took away from just being vulnerable sometimes and saying like I don't know how to do this, even on Twitter, and just getting that perspective helped me when I became a teacher because it allowed me to ask those questions. And I always had that support starting off where I know that I'll get answers and then I can adapt those and figure out what works for my students.
That's great. Uh, when you were working with your co-op or your mentor teacher during that time, what was I'm hoping you can pull on this because I'm really putting you on the spot, but what was a specific lesson or even just a small activity inside of a lesson, something that that teacher constructed to facilitate a learning experience for your students that you just you never heard of it, or you never saw something like that, or you didn't learn about it in your college courses, just a way a lesson went that you said, wow, that was a really great way to teach students. Can you pull on anything like that, because that's a pretty specific question to put you on the spot with?
Yeah, I was thinking about my answer while you were asking me. During student teaching, we did a project with the students where we were growing seeds in the classroom, and we tied science to math, so we made it, having that connection between different subjects so that the students could see it's not just about our math class, but we could relate to different content areas. And they would just track the growth of their seed into a plant, and we would measure it like every few days and just track that on a graph. So it tied in, science, math, but also the kids really got into it and they were super excited about seeing how big their plant grew and just like different things like that when we walked in. And that was something we were learning at ISU about like combining, subject areas and tying in real life examples. And I never really saw that work in the classroom because I never had that perspective of it being a bigger trend about like, tying in content areas. And now even as a teacher, like I try to tie in real life applications as much as possible, but it's not always easy to do, especially right now during remote learning. It's hard to find those, connections. So I try to build on real life contexts, but I wish I could, I think with experience, those projects where students are building and they're assembling and they're doing things will become easier for me to put together.
Matt, do you have any context to offer in terms of, you had at least a little bit more time teaching in we'll say a regular classroom pre-COVID. I know cross-curricular was always a big part of your instruction. What's a lesson or a long-term project that you've possibly transformed with the technology that you are forced to use right now, or one that you have coming up that you can kind of talk about what it looked like before and what it's going to look like now?
I think not necessarily a project. I think so. Ken and I recorded a podcast talking about how the beginning of the year rollout of technology is, and I think it's an interesting. Ken and I have two different perspectives on how to do it, but one of the things that I've realized that in this current world and how we're teaching is the dependence on being tech literate. And just like in the wave of flipped learning, one of the keys there is to train kids to watch videos, because realistically they can view something, but they can't take something in instructionally unless you give them assistance. It's kind of like independent reading. If you say, hey, you're going to independently read for these 5 minutes in my class, I teach fourth graders, they don't do anything for 5 minutes long. So the idea of them sitting quietly and actually you have to build up to that. And I feel like that same training is going into how to utilize what we took for granted and ends up being our lifeline. So how do you get on a video chat? How do you use an LMS, submit, participate appropriately in a discussion? I think that's the biggest transformation. That's sometimes our justification of learning, not just a unique way that we can submit or organize our projects and be able to grade them without taking a stack of papers home.
And some advice I would offer is what you just referenced, Matt, is something that teachers, and I've been trying to emphasize with the teachers that I work with, we do this every year, establishing systems, establishing routines and expectations. Veteran teachers can do that with their eyes closed and their hands tied behind their back, because we do it year in and year out. This year has just looked totally different. So although you may never teach in a virtual environment again, hopefully, by next year, Susan, the skills that you're building now in terms of establishing that relationship that you talked about, establishing those routines, it's way harder right now. And those skills are really going to serve you well as you move back into what teaching was like when you first got into it.
And hopefully sooner than later, by all means.
Absolutely. So when you were, whether you were student teaching or early in your career, you were talking about starting your social media account and asking questions, which I think is fantastic. I mean, not just in education, but just in anything that we do, your ability to ask questions and be vulnerable, like you said, is the best way to learn. And it's going to ultimately benefit the students that are in front of you. What are some important questions that you have asked? And what are some of those answers that you've gotten that have really helped, change your mindset, shape your mindset, or just helped you survive, in that moment?
Yeah, I think even questions like I know when I was starting early on, classroom management is always, a big struggle for newer teachers. So there were days where I was like, okay, that didn't go well. I just need an idea, to try the next day. Like, what can I do differently? Or I need help organizing stations, or, just different questions that came up as I progressed throughout my career that maybe you don't think of until you're in that situation trying to do the best you can. But then when you reflect later, you realize, oh, I have this network that I can ask this question to and see, what different answers they give me that I can adapt, tweak, modify to fit my students. So there's been a lot of even like lessons this year where I am teaching, this week and on ratios, or I need something to pull from that I can use. So it's always getting those resources, those ideas. Now, most of them have been super helpful, but you always have to look at it carefully, and make sure that it's going to work for what you need, the purpose you want it for. So I always heard like teachers pay teachers, like don't use it fully, but I know a lot of newer teachers did. And I felt guilty to that when I needed something really quick, I would go on it. And now I'm realizing like it didn't serve my students well because it was really just busy work that I needed because I was trying to survive my first year. And now I'm really focusing on it through a more constructive lens. Like I'll look at it and maybe there's something that works for whatever I'm doing, but I need to intentionally plan it within my unit and not just bring things on kids that aren't beneficial for them, in the long run, or something that they don't feel interested in because it's a worksheet that we could do, more interactively, especially now.
And I think that's something as a new teacher, I mean, I remember my own connection. Mine was a classroom library. I took anyone and everyone's unwanted books into my library with no organization method because I thought it's better to have a lot of options than narrow down. And I think for new teachers that are listening, that's awesome. And I'm sure you've heard that advice before, but realistically, when your platter of resources are empty, you will take any and everything you can get. And then the skill becomes narrowing down what is the best use. So I'd rather have 6 books in my library with enough copies for each kid and a few extras of interest that I know that I can make good suggestions towards kids rather than a huge collections of book that in my library that I have no clue what's there. I can't personalize anything or speak to anything. I think what you're saying is as you're getting into the rhythm of teaching, your evaluation is, oh, we're teaching ratios. It tells me it teaches ratios. I'm going to trust it. And then the teaching craft comes in and you really kind of pull in. I think that's a really interesting but tough perspective of sometimes we just bring it all. Hey, send all of the unwanted stuff to the new teacher's classroom. They'll sort through it eventually. And then 2 or 3 years later, you have a big clean out sending it to another new teacher.
How do you evaluate that student's success? Whether it's a lesson you've created, it's in your programs or, something from online. How are you evaluating that? Wow, that worked for my students. It didn't work or somewhere in the middle.
I feel like I ask a lot of questions, I think to the point where my students are used to it. Like if, we do a lesson and I'll ask them like, how is this going? Or are you getting this? And sometimes they answer, sometimes they, choose not to, but I can also tell by the kids who have their like video on, I can see their face when we're doing something. But a lot of times we use a lot of formative and summative assessments. So we have a Mastery Connect program that we use. So I have an assessment on there, they do it, and then we can see if they're in the green or yellow or red based on where they're at with the skill. And that helps me decide like what groups do I need to pull for this topic, or which students are telling me that they understand it, but evidently, there's a gap or there's something they didn't get. And a lot of times I also, for the chat, I know that's different for sure because we didn't have a chat feature, but a lot of my quieter students, I think, like to chat in private. So they'll just chat to me and tell me the answer. Whereas in the classroom, the quieter kids usually didn't raise their hand. And we had to really figure out a different way to get their voice heard in the classroom. So I'm noticing a difference between trying to reach all my students is that, even the shy ones are still able to express themselves in the chat versus if we were in person, that wouldn't necessarily be the case because I was shy growing up and I did not like to raise my hand. So if I had a chat feature, I think that could have changed the game because I have things to say, but I wasn't able to vocalize it in front because I was just, shy and intimidated or whatever the reason was. But now thinking to my students who have those personalities, I feel like they're able to shine in a virtual setting. So it's interesting to see that perspective.
I think that's huge.
I love what you just said. I've, in my work with teachers as an instructional coach, we're forced to use a lot of things that we didn't use before, or we didn't use as often, regardless of if you're face-to-face or you're virtual, you're blended, you're somewhere in the middle right now. And what I keep encouraging them is, all right, let's find the best solution that we have to use right now. It usually involves technology, a heavy use of it. And then I always encourage them after the lesson, I want you to think, how did that compare to what you did in the past, where there was possibly no or much less technology. And be critical, but be honest and say to yourself, wow, that was actually a lot better for X, Y, and Z. Or, what, that really, it helped me now, but it just is better without technology. And I'm going to go back to the old way. Or maybe there's a blending of the two pieces. And what you were just saying about the chat, I want to hit on that, because I came to a realization when I was in the classroom. I did a lot of small group instruction. And at the time, I was starting to experiment with Nearpod, which is a great live and student-paced interactive presentation tool. If you have never heard of it, I would highly recommend checking it out. And, at face value, this is a great way to engage an entire audience, a whole class lesson, because you can control their screens, you can build in interactive questions. I actually started using it almost exclusively in my small group instruction lessons, where I had 5 kids in front of me, but I was having them answer questions on their device, as opposed to writing it on a whiteboard, and they were submitting it to me instead of holding the whiteboard up. And what I found was I was getting a better idea of where my students were at. I was asking more questions that solicited an individual response versus asking the question to 5 kids, waiting for 2 or 3 of them to raise their hand, and then calling on one of them, even with the use of good wait time. And I really found it to be powerful to really get responses from every student. So the reason I'm circling to this is I want you to remember what you just said next year when you are teaching face-to-face in a quote-unquote normal environment and you are doing stations. Don't forget about the virtual kids that you just said are shining, and make sure you find ways to allow your students to have a private chat with you. Now, are you going to have all your kids log on Zoom when they come to school? No. But what are strategies that you can implement so that those virtual students that did shine can still shine in your classroom?
Without taking away from the social end. And I mean, honestly, it's that classic, how do we touch base with the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic learners in each of your lessons? How do we maximize their learning method? One of the things I just want to comment, and feel free to add on this. I know we've mentioned your social media. Your social media influence on Twitter is astonishing for a new teacher. Around 11,000 or more followers. And I think when I was going through before the interview, just kind of getting myself familiar, I just appreciated how raw and honest you were in using that platform. Ken and I have gone to a few conferences, and a lot of the messages as teachers, we need to advocate for teachers because we're used to putting our heads down and barreling through the opposition. And just putting a smile on and doing the best for kids. And I think that you do a pretty incredible job of reaching out and acknowledging and putting great thoughts out there, but also your needs and challenges. And I think when I was going through it, it brought me back very much to the same emotions that I felt and still feel, and maybe just not as brave to put it out there for everyone to see and to honestly create support, but also awareness.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was the main, at the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to share my experiences and blog about what I'm going through. And I have this blog from pre-student teaching, which is really cool to reference now because, writing it was always something that I was like, yeah, I need to write a blog post. But now looking back, it's just funny as to what I wrote or things that happened. I was like, yeah, I grew from that, or I feel better about that situation now. I would have known how to handle it. And then I always get comments about my Twitter that, it is an authentic, I try to be as genuine as possible and I try to be myself. And if I'm having a rough day, I want to get advice. And, some teachers, especially newer teachers, find that comforting because I think there's been more of a push towards newer teachers now going on Twitter. I've noticed so many more student teachers and even teachers from ISU who are trying to make Twitter accounts and they're writing about their experiences and how they're feeling. And I think it's been a push towards being more open and creating that platform, whichever way to get that support, even virtually, on a social media. It's not always easy to, write about your experiences and see, but I have such a supportive group. And I think it really depends on who you follow and who you interact with. Because if I knew I had people who didn't support, or who weren't educators, I would feel different about what I'm putting out there, but because I know that people have been with me since my pre-service days, they know my personality. They know that this is always, a positive lens, and I'm really trying to just solve my whatever's going on that day, or just get advice or encouragement. I think that makes a huge difference in being open and being authentic, and just trying to support those newer teachers anyway. And I think they need to know the good and the bad, that sometimes days aren't perfect, but we learn from them and we get through it. And I think it's important for them to see that we're human, and, we have our, our days too, but it's important as how you get through it and how you overcome those obstacles.
So I think one of the things that I found most interesting there is, and hearing you talk about this, is one of the early suggestions I got from an advisor was, it's really challenging to go to an administrator with your problems. It's way different to go to an administrator with problems when you suggest a few solutions. And I think just the idea of saying, hey, I'm not dumping this off on you to fix. I've really thought about what are some of the thoughts that I had that could lead to solution. And if that administrator takes it, great. If not, no big deal. But I think using Twitter, it can be a negative space for a lot of places, but genuinely in education, it's an incredibly powerful and positive, uplifting, resource-heavy environment that it is incredibly empowering and like just a huge boost and support system embedded into it. And I find your use of it as being you supporting others, making others recognize that my issues are normal and you're just brave enough to put them out there, but also your use of talking through tough scenarios and helping create possible solutions in classrooms all over the country to similar problems that everyone's dealing with. I just think that that's an incredibly powerful thing, especially for a new teacher, because you haven't had enough experience at this point of a lot of these situations. Current days, no one has enough experience with what we're dealing with, but I found even your pre-service and some of those components to be just the questions that need to be thought about. And if you're not dealing with that question now, you're going to hear about it soon. Sorry, Ken, I cut you off there. I don't know if that was related.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, I think one of the most important things for teachers to do, and it's difficult to do in general as well as finding the time, is being reflective on our practice on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. By marking period, I would typically have the students fill out a pretty comprehensive, I would call it, like Mr. Ehrman report card, at least once a marking period, for them to tell me what was working, what wasn't working. When I started, it was before I had any technology in the classroom. So I actually still, in my filing cabinet, I have, like 500 pieces of paper of students filling out open-ended questions, commenting and reflecting on what I was doing well and what I could do more to support them, what lessons they liked, what they remembered. So I think it's super important to do that. And I love how you're doing it in a digital sense to really create that timestamp for yourself. Like you said, you can go back and you can look at this. And I think as you continue to do that, at least in my career, I was constantly trying to evolve and improve. And then sometimes I would look back and say, oh, you know what, that project or even just that lesson, that was an awesome lesson. Why did I stop doing that? You almost just forget some of the things that go really well because you're constantly trying to improve. And so having those timestamps, I think, is super important. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that right now. You are very early in your career. Let's just, for the conversation's sake, say that you are the classroom teacher that stays in the classroom for the 35 years, which is very admirable. Others go in different paths, but you stay in the classroom for 35 years. What do you want yourself to remember in year 30 that is important to you right now?
I would say to be reflective. I think a lot of times I know that a lot of teachers get stuck in their ways, and not intentionally. I think it just over time, when you start building those patterns and those habits, you get used to them. So it's hard to break them once you're used to it. So I think just that the power of, pausing and jotting down something that went well and something that didn't, or blogging about it in my sense, or just, making time for it. Because I think if you're intentional about reflecting, you're going to get better a little bit each day. It might not be like, huge progress within a year, but as those habits become more normal, or if you realize something's not working, it's important to say, you know what, why am I still doing this? Like, that's not serving my students in the, well, I need to modify it or tweak it or figure something out that's gonna serve my students. And I think it's not always perfect, as we know, but I think it's always important to be reflective and to really be intentional about what we're doing in the classroom. I don't want to do something just to check a box or to fill something, but I want to make sure my students learn and that they show me that they're growing in whatever way that looks like. It could be just that they're like, today I did a talk about like just self-care, or like, what's going on, how is this going? Like, we care about you, and the kids say like, yeah, we get that, like, you do care. And but I always feel like, why are we not turning in work? Like, what's going on behind the scenes? Like, trying to understand that perspective. And I'm like, I don't think teachers really ask you guys, because we're busy and we fall into the habit of just putting assignments out there. And sometimes the kids don't have that outlet to just tell us like what's going on. Are they not getting it? Is there too much work assigned on Google Classroom in every class? How is it keeping track of everything? I can't imagine being a student right now, because there's a lot. They have six different classes and different folders and different topics, and to find all the assignments for some of them has been really difficult. So trying to give them that space to be open and say, you know what, I'm having a hard time managing what to prioritize, and just being open to helping them with that is super helpful. So I think just being reflective and, you know, making a little bit of just an adjustment, towards your career, and just a little change, but before you get stuck in your ways.
I think that's huge. And I think Ken and I, and I'm sure you, Susan, can even find coworkers that are making adjustments and being reflective, and their joy of education is still there, midway through their career, towards the end of their career. You can see the coworkers, unfortunately, that they have lost some of that passion, because they haven't reflected, or what they've reflected hasn't been worth them putting the effort. Whether it's, oh, I only have a few years left type mentality, which is a hard thing to swallow, when you're making an impact on a kid's life, or many kids' life. Speaking kind of related to passions, I mean, so obviously we know that you love math and love teaching and are all into it. Is there a specific aspect that you just absolutely love about every day right now? Again, it's unique, it's new. Is there something that sticks out in your early experiences in the classroom and virtually that you are just really enjoying?
I just always love the kids. That's why, we get into education for the students. And I think on those days where it's harder, I have grad school assignments piling up or whatever is going on, knowing that I can get up in the morning and teach my students and just see their smiles, or at the moment, see them kind of start to wake up in the morning because we start early. But just being able to see their interactions in the chat, or them telling us a joke, or, they get comfortable with us as the year goes, and that progression, like, where now they know us, they feel safe, they feel like they can write about their life and what's going on the weekend and things like that. And that's what keeps you going, because I think there's days where we have tests, or we have, observations, or there's a lot going on, and then there's days where I really just sit back and sometimes I just enjoy my students. Like, I need this for myself to, relax and have fun with the kids for a little bit, and they need that too. So there's days where I just have them work on stuff and we just talk in the chat, or they throw whatever's going on in their lives in the chat and we just have a conversation. And it's those moments where, I do miss the face to face. Like, in the classroom, it was different. You see the kids, they wave at you, or they, talk to you in the hallways. And now it's definitely different being virtual, where you see them for 50 minutes and then they're just gone and you don't see them till the next day. It's hard sometimes to realize, like, you know, I wish we could see them face to face, because I haven't met these students in person. But I do office hours, so some kids come in then and they talk, and that's been nice to have that other way to really talk to them besides just academics. So, just being focused on the kids, because that's the forefront of what I do. And I think they always make you smile. And, sometimes they say silly things, but they always make you want to come back and keep doing your job.
Excellent. I want to kind of circle back to what you were talking about, Matt, before you asked that great question. And it's going to come off as advice, and it is not advice coming because I think I know more than you. It's advice coming purely from a point of being in the career longer. Matt, you were talking about the teachers that are near the end of their career in the sense that they've been teaching for a long time. They're still passionate. They're still changing. They're trying to evolve, especially now more than ever. And the one thing I think that the three of us have in common, Susan, in like Matt has said, looking at your social media presence and just this conversation, is you're running in circles of innovative teachers, of teachers that are putting themselves out there as well, that are constantly trying new things. And Matt and I kind of ran in similar circles, not nearly as broad as you are this earlier in your career, but we were involved with the, we'll say, innovative teaching class in the sense that we were constantly trying new things. And what I'm getting at here is, when I look back, I will never forget a teacher that retired, Diane Holtz. She was a second grade teacher for a long, long time. I think she taught some other primary grades before I was there. She was an absolute rock star teacher, one of the best teachers that I've ever worked with. And I didn't take the opportunity to learn from her like I should have. She taught reading and writing better than anyone I've ever worked with. And I only know this from the students who I had 3 years after they had her telling me that, or my other colleagues telling me that, or really I came to that realization during her retirement assembly. And I realized that I missed the opportunity to learn from her because I was so focused on trying to do everything new and innovative and not looking at and saying like, wow, she's been doing this for a really long time and she's phenomenal at it. And I also came to that realization just working with some other teachers that I was picking up things here and there. So I would just say, look around you, especially maybe even outside of your department, outside of your school, depending how your district is set up. Where are those rock star teachers that have just been doing it for 20, 30 years and are still just killing it? And what can you learn from them that they have been doing consistently year in and year out? Don't miss out on those opportunities to learn from those amazing teachers. So Matt, do you want to throw something in before we?
Can I just add one more thing? And then I think, so I have that same scenario. And one thing that I did that I would highly suggest, and Susan, you may be a little too early in your career, but eventually we have an observation option of co-teaching with another teacher. And I had the institution of writing was Judy Howder at Pequea Valley. Anyone who was going to learn how to be a proficient reader or writer went to Judy's class, and just regardless of the kid's background, they could be ESL, they could, whatever the case may be, they left as an incredible writer. She just worked tirelessly. And one of the ideas that I had was, could I, as a new teacher, partner with her as my observation option of goal setting and co-teaching collaboration. And we spent the entire year meeting once a week and talking about lessons. And I would give her the daring technology integration and kind of translate information for her. And she would bring the content. And it simply changed my classroom completely. I recognized very early on that technology wasn't for frills. It was a way to deliver an instruction deeper than what we could before. Or kids that don't have the opportunity to leave their house, they just don't have the opportunity to experience the world like maybe hopefully many kids do. That was a way to get out. And so giving her, hey, we're going to talk about this ancient civilization. Let's go and do some real research, not just she would have these classic pages in page protectors that you could tell she used year after year, but they were incredibly successful. So just kind of tapping into Ken and Susan, what you were kind of referencing as well. It's one of the best things that I ever made early in my teaching career was utilizing it. And I kind of double dipped because I had to have a method of partnering anyway.
That's great. That's really why we started this podcast, because we want to connect teachers, our listeners, with people that are doing great things in the classroom. So we're going to transition into one of our segments called a look at your lesson. I think I've called it something different every time so far. But it is 6 questions that Matt and I have, and we're just going to volley them back and forth. Feel free to, take the question in the direction that you want, but the idea is to just help the audience kind of visualize and see a lesson that you're proud of doing, or one that you tried once, didn't go great, you tried again. However you want to take it, we're excited to dive into that. So the first question is this a single lesson, or is it more of a week-long activity, unit overview? What's that? What is it that we're looking at?
A single lesson.
All right. So I assume that we know the grade level and the subject area. Is this a lesson that happens beginning, middle, end of the year, holiday related? When does this occur in the year?
It's holiday related.
Oh, all right.
Wow, Matt, I'm impressed that you threw that little
I
anecdote
know.
in there, and that's what it was. I'm impressed.
I'm proud of myself.
So what were the objectives for the lesson?
To really work on unit rates and comparing prices.
So if you're sitting in the lens of a student reflecting, what was their role throughout that activity?
We were trying to do advertisements, so we gave them picture and prices of different items that they needed to plan a Thanksgiving meal. And, they used unit rate to figure out what would be the better buy. How could I buy this for my family? How much would I have to pay in applying those skills? So that was more hands-on because they were able to look at the prices, figure it out. We weren't really leading it. We were walking around just kind of, even in a virtual space, we did it, and they enjoyed it because they were able to take that real life connection and see, oh, I can use this. Like if I go to a grocery store, or if I really need to plan this meal, what would I get? What options would I pick to not spend as much money? And a lot of students don't have that connection with financial applications, or they don't realize how much things cost sometimes. So it was helpful for them to see it through that lens.
I'm going to ask a quick question before my official question. When your students are doing work like this, do they use calculators?
If it's a harder problem, yes. Usually we tell them to do it on paper, but if it's something that we know that's going to take them a lot more, we care about that they know how to do use the process to figure out unit rate. And they can use a calculator to get there as long as they show us the steps to get to the answer.
Good. I'm a math guy at heart, and I always like to dive into that. So my next question is, and you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can add some more detail. While the students were actively engaged in the activity, what was your role during the lesson?
Our role was really obviously in a face-to-face, I was walking around and monitoring what they were doing, maybe kind of overhearing some conversations or asking them questions to probe their thinking. I think in a virtual space, I was really there to either pull groups or to ask questions in the chat, or if they had questions on Google Classroom, they would ask and we would be responding that way. But also we had Cami, so we were able to see their work on the screen, so we could see where they're at with their problem solving, if they're even working on it, how that's going for them, like if they're engaged, and a lot of students say they like things like that because they like to be actively involved in the work that they're doing.
All right, so I have a few ways that you can answer this question, so I'll try to make it as easy as possible. So next year, you're preparing to teach this lesson again. What is either something you reflect and would want to change in either the virtual or in-person setting, or end, I guess, how would you want to extend even further to drive even deeper than you have previously?
I would say to use physical, like to change it a little bit, to use physical, like ads or physical, something that we can find on the internet, like using research skills to maybe find a store that their parents shop at where they could actually get the prices and have that real life context. Because if we're finding prices on, Clipart or a website, they're not accurate. So maybe finding like an accurate amount, like how much does this cost, like right now in 2021, and having them actually figure it out and use those skills on the computer, but also then tying it to math and making it more of a real life authentic experience rather than teachers just giving a worksheet with numbers on them that they're expected to figure this out. I think having accurate prices and having that skill of, researching and making decisions based on which store would be cheaper than at Walmart or Target or wherever they shop, just getting that context, like where should I, what options do I have? Is a store even within a miles away? Is that going to help my cost or my budget go down for this? What is my budget? And just really researching and figuring out those questions that they have.
I think that's great. Anytime you can make it more applicable to the real world is super important. Having the multiple stores as options, like you said, through advertisements or even them, shopping online. I mean, I guess in theory they could probably fill an Instacart or one of those applications, Peapod, whatever mode you're using, and even throwing the idea out there to allow them to say, listen, if you want to go to 4 different stores to get the turkey here, the green beans there, be my guest, and then have them reflect afterwards. You might have a student that found the cheapest way to build the best dinner, and they go to 5 stores, and then you talk about, well, how much gas did you use to go from store to store, or how much time did you spend to save, 38 cents compared to the other one that went to one store? Like, have them almost evaluate how much their time is worth, not only just the skills and the objectives that you're doing. All those things, when you build in those real world applications, like you said, you can just elicit more of those conversations. So thank you. That was great. You painted that picture well. I was able to visualize it very well. So we're going to transition into our last segment called the exit ticket. 4 questions from Matt and I. Question number 1 is, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
I would say definitely care for them and show them that, they matter within your classroom and that you're there for them if they're dealing with something or if they just need that outlet, to have someone. We always try to have one teacher that a student can relate to because it makes their experience worthwhile and it makes sure that those students are feeling connected within our school and our classroom.
All right. So you can tap into colleagues or professors, honestly, PLN. What do you think is, when you think about your first piece of advice or your best piece of advice you've received, what's the first thing that pops into your mind that influences you most frequently?
I had a former professor say that, that a lot of pre-service teachers, they really worry about being liked by their students, especially when they're early on, but they should worry more about making a difference. And that has been something that has stuck with me. I think I even wrote it on Twitter about a week ago. But that's something that resonated with me. Like, we just worry so much about whether or not our students like us, especially as newer teachers, but we really shouldn't. We should worry more about making a difference in their lives and being that teacher who cares about them, but also having that firm line of, being the teacher, but also showing them that you care. And so that, that has stuck with me and continues to be something that I continue to reflect on throughout my career so far. And I know that's something that I'll keep thinking about as I progress.
That's phenomenal advice. We know the school year goes in waves. There are stressful times. You come on report cards, conferences. So when you're in those moments where it's just like you don't even feel like you can prepare yourself for tomorrow, what is some advice that you want to give to teachers in that moment to help them power up and re-energize?
I would say find something that re-energizes you. Like, for me, it's sometimes just reading a book or doing something, watching a movie down in with hot chocolate or whatever it is that I want to just relax and unwind. I think it's so important to find something that makes you, you need a break. And I think sometimes we have those moments or those busy weeks where we do have report cards and conferences and you feel like you don't have time for yourself because you're constantly working or, having more time to just focus on school, and you need that time to recharge. So whether that's a weekly shopping trip somewhere on the weekend or just getting your favorite coffee or whatever it is, just find something that makes you relax and unwind is really important.
All right. So the last one is comes down to, we've mentioned your social media presence before. I'm sure we've talked about Twitter, but if a teacher or someone in the field want to get in contact with you, what is the best way to get in contact with you and other items that you're currently working on that we can look forward to seeing?
Yeah, so on Twitter, it's at Miss Jehimiak, which is MSJACHYMIAK. That's the best way. I'm always on Twitter, just trying to connect with others in the field. But also, I am currently in grad school, so I should hopefully finish that by next year. So that's been something that has been great. Trying to take 2 classes right now is great. It's kind of an adjustment, of course, being virtual, but it's going well. And so hopefully getting my master's, and then I don't know, I kind of want to be a professor down the road. So we'll see what happens with that if I decide to get my doctorate and, work on that. But I'm still young, so who knows what I'm going to end up wanting to do. But at the moment, I do want to be a professor and, help new teachers, student teachers, pre-service teachers get into the field of education and share my experiences with them, because I know that, I love impacting my students and I want to do that. But I also see the need to, inspire and encourage teachers that are going into the field as well.
That's fantastic. And we will link to Susan's social media handles as well as her blog and any of her other resources on our show notes page, which you can find at powereduup.com/show5. We appreciate everyone listening. This was a great interview. I really enjoyed it, Susan. I thought you brought great insight, especially for how young you are in your career. And I know your students are super lucky to have you in their classroom, both face-to-face and virtual. So thank you for joining us. For all our listeners and viewers, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We're still young and growing. We ask that you share this episode if it brought you some insight with a specific colleague or just out on your own social media platforms as well. If you haven't done so already, please join our small growing community at powereduup.com. The most important thing you can find there is our forums, where you can ask questions like Susan talked about being so important tonight. You can reflect just out in the open for a lesson that you've had, or you can share those lessons, resources, and ideas that you have had yourself. So, Susan, I hope that you will join us on there and possibly throw one or two of your thoughts up there every once in a while, in addition to what you do on Twitter. You can find us on social media. Everything is Power EDU Up. So thanks again, Susan and Matt. Why don't you take us on out of here?
All right. So as we power down this episode, hopefully we leave you feeling extra powered up. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.